This week on the Communicators, a discussion about federal policy that directly affects technology companies. Our guest is Rey Ramsey, President and CEO of TechNet.
Rey Ramsey, what is TechNet?
TechNet is a bipartisan political and policy organization that's been around for about 15 years. And our whole focus is to move an innovation agenda across the country.
Which companies are members of TechNet?
I'd say we've got a nice list of good companies, large and small, from the Silicon Valley to Boston to Texas. So, you know, some of the names that you would hear of, that you would know of, from Microsoft, Google, Cisco, Intel, but also companies like Akamai in Boston and Autodesk, a nice mix of companies.
What is a technology policy?
Technology policy is really all about technology-driven innovation. And so all the way from education to biomedical to social innovation, things that use technology, those are the things that get our attention.
So specifically when we talk about issues, let's say net neutrality, what is it that TechNet does when it comes to net neutrality?
Well, we take a position and we get in the game of policy, and you know the game of policy can be messy, you know, sometimes. So we're trying to reach consensus amongst companies. We're trying to work with our whole sector, even companies that aren't part of TechNet, and then trying to get a coherent policy in place. And so we work with the FCC, we work with the House committees, from Congressman Waxman to other folks, Rockefeller, you know, to try to fashion policies that make sense for the country.
So what is TechNet's position on net neutrality?
You know, it's interesting because net neutrality is one of those issues you happen to pick, which is it all depends on how you define net neutrality. I think we now live in a time where no one's in favor of discrimination in terms of the internet. So I would say our position is to try to seek a balance between innovation and investment. You want private sector investment in the infrastructure of broadband, but at the same time you want to make sure that entrepreneurs are protected and not discriminated against, and that there's competition and that the consumer is not harmed. So it's basically do no harm. And I would say our position is based on humility, that we don't know all where technology is going to take us. So let's put a structure in place that will have some principles. And I think the FCC chairman laid out some good principles about broadband, and we tend to support those principles.
So can you get your companies that belong to TechNet all on the same page when it comes to an issue like net neutrality?
Well, you know, you never get 100% agreement on every aspect of an issue, but I think we were able to forge a good enough consensus, and net neutrality is still very much, let's wait and see. You know, with the changes in Congress, we're all sort of waiting to see how this is going to play out, but we were very much in favor of let's have language that makes sure wireless is covered in some way. Let's make sure that the FCC itself has a level of authority to deal with these issues. And then let's have room for technical analysis of where technology is taking us. That tends to be the framework of what we've been looking at TechNet.
Broadband plan that was rolled out about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
What's your position?
Very, very much in favor, and we applauded the administration for being the first one to have a broadband plan. And I think it lays out some good markers in some very key areas, all the way from spectrum to universal service to net neutrality and the kinds of investments we need, and sets some big goals about where the country is going to be in 5 years. I think that's a good thing, and I think it sets a North Star. And I really, again, applaud Julius Janikowski and his team when putting this together.
When it comes to technology policy, do you see it moving in a public-private co-venture sort of way?
I would say it has to, you know, and I think when we try to go down a route that's only government making the investment, we run into trouble. If you look at this administration through the stimulus bill, they made a major down payment on broadband for the first time, but when you compare it to the private sector investment, it's still fractional. So they've got to work together, the private sector with government, and also the nonprofit sector.
What about tax policy?
Well, obviously, every corporation is impacted by tax policy, and our position is to do an overlay that says we need to be competitive. We need to create a tax structure where our companies can compete globally, because so many more of technology-based companies are competing on a global playing field. So we have some concerns with the existing tax structure.
How would you like to see it changed?
I think I would start with two things. One is always strategically where we would like to go, and then it's tactically where should we go. Strategically, in terms of taxes, we need to have a tax structure that's competitive globally, meaning that we should not have this territorial tax where we tax our companies at a 35% rate and follow their profits overseas. And then we have, of course, this notion called deferral, and so we defer that until you bring the profits back to the U.S. I think we need to have a lower rate, a rate that makes us more competitive with the other global competitors. But tactically, I think we have a unique opportunity here if we can figure out how to make this happen. And it could be bipartisan. And it's something, you'll hear this term, repatriation. And really what that is let's repatriate, let's bring some of those profits back to the United States. And if we could do a tax rate that makes sense, we could have, in essence, another stimulus that could be a real jolt in a positive way for our economy. Estimates range as much as $1 trillion is sitting offshore we could bring back to the United States if we could have a tax rate that makes sense. That's a short-term tactical solution, but I think it has to fit into a longer-term strategic look at how can we have a globally competitive tax structure while also bringing in tax receipts for the government, which certainly needs it.
You know, Rey Ramsey, a lot of people, either on our morning show, The Washington Journal, or on Communicators, when we've talked about tax policy, they've all agreed on this. Why is it not happening? Who is holding it up?
You know, it's hard to sort of say, and I think, unfortunately, sometimes tax policy gets caught up in some of the demagoguery that can occur in Washington, because this is good policy. And I think I'm hopeful and optimistic that we can have the right coalition come together and figure out a way to do this. And what you have to first do is say, what's the rate? You know, so you're not going to bring the money back. You're not going to repatriate it at 35. So we have to come up with a rate that makes sense. Then the next question is, should it be open in terms of bringing it back with the companies, or do we want to do something around jobs or investment? And so I think if we can sort that out, the administration working together with corporate America and other organizations, unions and others, I think we can reach a deal, bipartisan.
Your organization, TechNet, is only 15 years old.
Yes.
Why did it not form earlier?
That's hard to say. And I think it really coincides with the maturation of the tech sector. You know, remember, we're made up of so many entrepreneurs and engineers and folks that wouldn't naturally turn to Washington. They look to the universities, and they look to themselves, and they look to venture capitalists. But suddenly over time, beginning to see, well, you know, we're in this together with government. Policies do make a difference, and so I think that they increasingly see the value.
Do you find that Washington understands the tech world?
I think that that is an ongoing process of each side understanding the other.
Does Silicon Valley feel isolated from Washington?
I think some would say at times we do, but there's a growing awareness of Washington's role. You know, and some would say for better, some would say for worse. But Washington plays a role. It's significant. If you look at clean tech, the role of the government in clean tech is very important. The role of government has historically been very important in terms of investing, in terms of R&D. So it's always been there, and I think there's just a growing realization.
Another policy, Rey Ramsey, that TechNet is involved in is education.
Correct. Correct. We've been supportive of the administration and their Race to the Top initiative. We're very much in favor of shaking up the existing orthodoxy of education. We believe that there are some things that work that we have to double down on. If you look at our education system, you're well aware how we slip behind other countries. This notion of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We believe that that's got to have greater importance, higher investment in terms of our schools. We've got to do testing that makes sense. And another thing that makes sense is an extended school day, a longer school day. We simply have to have more instruction in the classroom.
Who should be investing in that?
I think, well, clearly government should be investing in that. I mean, our tax dollars, I mean, look, the federal government is still only a fraction of the education budget. So much of this action has to occur at the local level, at the state level. So it's not just a Washington, D.C. issue, although expenditures of the Department of Education have gone up dramatically. What I think Secretary Duncan has done a very good job of is saying we need to look at how teachers are trained, how we evaluate teachers, and sort of open this up and bring in new thoughts. We applaud that.
What are tech companies doing privately to support education? We had the CEO of Qualcomm in for an interview, and he talked about a program that they were developing with the school system in North Carolina. Are tech companies doing this on a private basis? There
are so many exciting things going on with technology companies. You have social innovation work that's being done. Cisco has been doing work for years through the Cisco Academy. You have Intel with the Intel Clubhouse. You have Hewlett-Packard. There are a number of companies that are increasingly doing more. We have formed a nonprofit at TechNet called TechNet Works. And our goal is to promote some of the work that the tech sector is doing in education and other areas, but also leverage some of those investments in a stronger way. So our mission is to accelerate and to facilitate technology-infused social innovation, and that's what our new nonprofit is doing.
Well, the education sector ties into another problem that TechNet has been addressing or looking at, which is the immigration problem.
Correct.
What is
tough issue in terms of immigration. Look, we have to step back, and I look at immigration as part of a broader issue. It's human capital. We just talked about education. Education is part of human capital. Human capital, shortly defined, are the people you have, and how will you train them, and how will you prepare them, and the people you want, how will you bring them into America, how will you keep them, and how will you make this all work together. So immigration is part of that. H-1B visa is part of that. There are some encouraging proposals, that are out there that need support. And unfortunately, these human capital issues around immigration often get held hostage with the broader comprehensive immigration issue.
So when it comes to H-1B visas, what would you like to see done?
I think we should have a policy that says America is open for business. We want the best and the brightest from around the world to come to the United States. We need to raise the ceiling that we have on H-1B visas. It should be easier. And when any student graduates with a PhD or an engineering degree, we ought to stamp a visa to their diploma and make it easy for them to stay in America. America has to be the place that's open for business in terms of human capital. But at the same time, that's not a strategy by itself. It's also saying we have to work on our own domestic pipeline of human capital, which is let's train Americans, and let's have a better school system that prepares people for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow.
Rey Ramsey is the CEO of TechNet. He's our guest on Communicators. Mr. Ramsey, looking at OpenSecrets.org and some of the campaign contributions that your federal PAC made, the majority went to Democrats in both the House and in the Senate. Why?
Well, first, in the open secret, it doesn't have all the information, so I say that with a smile. TechNet, our primary role in fundraising is to serve as an aggregator. We work with our member companies and we do events. We did this cycle roughly 87 political events.
In Silicon Valley, in Washington?
In Silicon Valley, in Washington, in Boston, in Seattle, and in Texas. And so these are places where we have operations and we bring people together, we bring PACs together, we bring companies together to focus on candidates that support an innovation agenda. So we supported Democrats as well as Republicans.
And what was the split when you go beyond the open secrets information?
I believe that the split this past cycle was something like 60-40 Democrat, Republican. And some of that was a factor of incumbency, of course. But we've supported candidates on both sides.
Did you support Joe Barton and Fred Upton?
I don't want to state right now all the different candidates that we support, but I believe we've done events for several of those, several of those individuals.
Well, Joe Barton was a guest on the Communicators recently, and here's one thing he had to say. I want to get your response to this. Congressman Barton, if you were chairman, could you see the CEOs of companies such as Facebook and Google coming to testify on issues such as privacy in front of the committee?
I think you could almost guarantee that.
Mr. Ramsey.
I think it's good. As he said, you can guarantee that companies are going to be having a dialogue. Hopefully it's not that it ought to be a dialogue, that there should be a give and take, a listening and an exchange of thoughts, concerns, ideas. And so that's what I would say. And whoever is chairing this committee, whether it's Upton or whether it's Barton, we look for that active exchange. There are serious issues that have to be addressed. We know that privacy concerns are increasingly raised. There are other issues around trade that get raised. I think that it's good to have that kind of exchange.
Mr. Barton in that interview also talked about more oversight of the FCC.
Yes. Well, look, that's the prerogative of Congress in terms of having oversight of the FCC. I think the FCC has done some good work, but there's more to be done. I mean, I think that if you spoke to the FCC chair, he would tell you himself there's more that he would like to be getting done, right now. And I think if Congress gets involved, as long as we're all being constructive, again, I think that's a good thing.
What's your background?
My background is, of course, a lawyer, as so many people are in this city. I grew up in New Jersey, went out to Oregon. So I actually have a background in state government, state politics, where I was the head of housing for the state of Oregon. And then I moved east. I was the chairman of Habitat for Humanity International. I started a nonprofit with several other individuals called One Economy Corporation, which was dedicated to bringing broadband to the poor. And we're in 17 countries, right now. So I got to work with the tech culture in that space.
How did you get involved in broadband policy?
It just became sense when we were working on housing the poor. The issue became, how do you connect the poor to the economy? And broadband, to me, is the most efficient way to get that done. So starting One Economy was the marriage of broadband and technology with affordable housing, and the poor creating efficiencies to bring low-income people into this space.
What about in the United States? Is One Economy active in the U.S.?
One Economy is very active in the United States, and we have a program that I'm very excited with called Digital Connectors, which are young people that we train. So you talk about human capital. We've graduated 3,500 students who go through training, who provide a community service, and they're technology ambassadors in low-income communities.
Now, the National Journal reported that a lot of One Economy's success is due to, quote, the political savviness of its former chairman, Rey Ramsey,
Right.
and his friendship with Julius Genachowski. How did you get to know the chairman of the FCC?
It was one of these things, we just did outreach at One Economy. Again, we believe that it's truly one economy that's made up of multiple sectors. The NGO sector, the non-governmental sector, made up of the private sector and government. And so at that point, we were just reaching out to many different companies, and different people are placed in different jobs. And so that's just been an ongoing relationship.
Is he still a friend?
I would say the chairman is somebody that I believe in and is a friend, but so are a number of other folks. And I'm still the chairman of One Economy.
Oh, you still are
I'm still the
chairman.
chairman. I'm no longer the CEO.
Well, now that you're president and CEO of TechNet, when you have a conversation with Julius Genachowski, can you have one off the record?
Well, when I talk with him, it's usually to talk about policy issues. And so it's either at his request or at my request, and we follow the appropriate, procedures to talk about policy. We don't, sort of blur the lines.
You were quoted in the Huffington Post regarding broadband adoption. Today, only 46% of African Americans and 40% of Hispanics have broadband, and surveys show many don't see how it benefits them or that it's too expensive. Again, this roadmap must help deliver creative solutions to alleviate barriers to adoption, such as digital literacy.
Yeah, and you know why I wrote that is because sometimes I think in policy around broadband, we're breathless about the deployment issue. And we have roughly 97% of America has some level of broadband available to it. The issue in this country is adoption. Why is it that certain populations either aren't exposed to broadband, don't see the relevance of broadband or don't have the training to use the broadband. So the biggest issue is adoption, and this is why I was excited by the broadband plan, which addresses the issue of adoption.
What do you think the future of the broadband plan is with the Republicans in control in the House?
I think it still has legs because, again, so much of the plan requires the private sector and the NGO sector. And I think what the FCC did with this, and Blair Levin, who sort of really was the author of a lot of this, was to sort of call to arms to a lot of different entities. So it's not all going to be about only government action, but Republicans and Democrats care about spectrum. That's an issue that's got to be resolved. Most folks care about doing something about universal service. That's an issue that has to be resolved. So I have no expectation that suddenly these issues are going to be put in a drawer somewhere because our Republican friends are coming into power. I look forward to that continued dialogue.
When speaking with Joe Barton last week on the Communicators, he talked about the spectrum, and he advocated an auction, no conditions on the D block. What do you think?
Look, I think we need to, what's most important on the D block is let's get the auction moving. We shouldn't have any delay in that. We have a lot of companies and a lot of entities that need spectrum, and so I'm just in favor of let's get it going.
Rick Boucher lost.
Yes.
What does that mean to TechNet?
I mean, we lose someone who is enormously talented, who is very sophisticated on these issues. You'd be hard-pressed to find anybody superior to him in terms of his knowledge and intellect, on the subject matter. And I have a feeling that we'll hear from him, that we'll see him around in some way, in some capacity. I don't have any inside information on that, but someone that talented is going to find a way to continue to be involved in policy.
What's your relationship with Senator Rockefeller?
I've again done work with him, particularly through One Economy in West Virginia, and again, he is a strong advocate for so many important aspects of telecommunications, particularly work in rural communities.
Rey Ramsey is the CEO of TechNet, CEO and president. How long have you been with TechNet now?
Just since January.
And what have you learned?
A lot. Every day you learn what you don't know, and so the fun of the job is learning about the needs of the companies and what their positions are on different things. But it's an ongoing learning job, and that's what makes it fun.
When you have policy issues that your member companies disagree on, what do you do?
Duck. What's important is I look for the horizontal issues, the issues that cut across, that we can agree on. There are what I call vertical issues that companies will have that clash. I don't see that as our niche to sort of try to jump into those. We're looking for the bigger issues like human capital issues, like issues around broadband, things like that we can reach broad consensus on and then figure out a way to work together. That's really our niche.
One of the issues that is going to be coming up in the next Congress is the issue of privacy. There's more and more noise around the issue of privacy. Where does TechNet stand?
Again, that's such a broad category to say privacy. What we have to do is start figuring out what kind of regime we're going to put in place in terms of monitoring, in terms of standards. Privacy issues cut across trade, issues, what does it mean overseas, where is technology moving? So I think what we've got to do is most of all make sure our laws are sophisticated enough with where technology continues to move. But we see it as something that our sector has to be responsible about because the consumers are concerned about it. So we take it very seriously.
But isn't so much information already out there, it's almost too late?
No, I wouldn't say it's too late because it's a question of what do you do with information? It's what's the role of the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission? It's sort of sorting out the regulatory infrastructure here in the United States, in the EU, and in other places, and saying what's the 21st century regime going to look like? And I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space. Now, Congressman Boucher was a leading voice, in that space, so I think there's going to have to be some regrouping to decide where we go in terms of policy.
Now, these companies, a lot of these tech companies already have so much private information of individuals. Is this a case of saying, trust us with this?
No, I don't think it's that because, again, there is a role for government in terms of having rules of the road. I mean, even though technology has enabled more information to be accumulated more than any other technology or any other regime, companies for years have had information, and that's what I've said. You know, Federal Trade Commission, other entities have been regulatory in that space. Now that you've got this warp speed of the gathering of data, the question is, what's the regulatory framework that we're going to have in place? And I think that's where we have to continue to reach consensus on.
Privacy ties into the issue of security. What should the federal government be doing, in your view, when it comes to technology security?
Again, I think the federal government's got to look at security in terms of the consumer, but security in terms of intellectual property, in terms of companies. And I think that there's a lot of work left to be done in terms of both, particularly when you look at some of the piracy issues, you know, that are happening overseas. It costs our sector a lot of money when you look at what's happening in some countries, particularly in Asia, systematically taking information. In terms of security in the United States, I think we've got to continue to make more investments in this. There are some national security issues if our system crashes, if suddenly we don't have secure networks. I think we've got to do more in terms of making sure there's security for the emergency management folks. A whole host of issues that we've got to focus on.
Given the nature of technology, how much of this just stops at the border? I mean, aren't we getting to the point where complete international cooperation is necessary?
We have to,
on all issues, not just security.
We have to increasingly have cooperation across the world, because as I was pointing out, so many of our companies are multinational companies, and so they're dealing with regimes in whether it's the EU or whether it's in Asia, an individual country, or in the United States. So there is this overlap, and I think there's a lot to be done. A lot to be done. When
it comes to this overlap, especially let's just talk about cell phones or wireless products. I mean, at what point is wireless just going to be internationalized?
Well, it's happening. You know, I don't think we need governments to say we're going to mandate the internationalization, but what we do need to do is make sure, like we do in the United States, interoperability, you know, the way we have in the United States, you know, data roaming. You know, you're running into this as people are traveling. It's like, how do I use my cell phone? How do I use my device? So we don't have yet all of the same regimes in place, regulatory-wise, that we have domestically, but all of these are coming issues.
President Clinton was well known for his interest in technology issues back in the 90s. What are you finding in the current administration?
Well, I think this administration it takes a pretty sophisticated look in terms of, because again, look at the FCC, but you also look at technology in other areas, like the investments in smart grid that were made through the Stimulus Act, the tying of research and development and putting more dollars into that space, making large investments there, the promotion of STEM. All of these things are all interlocked, you know, in terms of technology.
Do you work at all with Vivek Kundra at the White House?
He's one of a number of folks that we engage.
Rey Ramsey is president and CEO of TechNet and remains chairman of One Economy. Thank you for being on the Communicators.
Good to be here. Thank you.